let's talk about the December monthly economic report for the first time from Australia. And let's start with kind of like a big summary here. All right. So the big points, in case you don't want to watch the whole video, if you're watching this on demand later, ISK faucets are high. They're higher than they have ever been, and they're rising. And one big issue this month was the other overseer personal effects from the Winter Nexus event, and we see this every year, right? We're going to look at some graphs right now, but it's December is inflation central because there's just so many people running these events, and they're incredibly lucrative and ISK generating, and that's why we're going to see ISK faucets a little bit out of control. And that coupled with still a 50% market transaction tax reduction that is really, in my view, not necessary anymore, because it kind of fell flat in July. Since then, it hasn't really done anything. It's just creating inflation. It's not increasing the amount of stuff that people are trading. And to be honest, if I don't really notice it, but if I don't really care, and I am just unloading a whole like billions and billions and hundreds of billions of stuff, like I am if I don't notice it, it's really it has fallen flat. And so I really am calling for CCP to reduce to take away that market transaction tax reduction, because if you want to crank up the ISK faucets, then make sure you still have the sinks in place. All right. Another thing we're going to talk about in the MER is mineral price index, and we talked about this on the live stream earlier. So mineral price index is as high as it's ever been. Yes, it's seemingly out of control. It's exponentially rising. Too many bottlenecks out there. Absolutely, right? Yes, it is high. I think one thing you have to remember is that basic minerals, and I explained this at length earlier in the stream, basic minerals are one part of the economy. They don't run everything, right? On a tier 2 manufacturing level, it's really not that impactful. It makes tier 1 ships quite expensive, which is an issue for tier 1 battleships or for new players. And so it is an issue, no question. On the other hand, I think it's one that is quite easily fixed, and we've told CCP on many occasions. I mean the CSM, and I think at some point we're going to hopefully find a good solution to the mineral price index. It's absolutely on their radar. CCP has said this. It's one of the top points on their agenda, and so hopefully this will be fixed rather soon. Because right now, pyrite is 90% above a yearly average. Maxilon is 150% above yearly average. Zydrine 60% above yearly average, and morphite is 80%, and that is above yearly average. And that is something that has just happened in the last couple of weeks. And so, yeah. Lastly, Metox moon drills. Okay, we continue to see that the vast majority of moon materials now come from Metox mining. And I said this a month ago for the November monthly economic report, but while I am happy that nullsec is happy about a passive income source, it just also means that on top of people not wanting to mine basic minerals, now we have a 60% reduction in people actually out in space mining moon minerals. So soon enough, we won't have anyone mining at all. And you want miners in space to be part of the food chain in space. And I think we should prioritize actions where or activities in game where people actually are in space. And the irony is not lost on me that I am somebody who is doing a lot of things in stations, but at least when I do undock, I lose a lot of I lose a lot of things, right, in space. I'm ISK negative on almost all undocking activities, and so I do think it's very healthy. And so I am not sure that the current environment that we're in, where 60% of all moon materials mined come from Metox moon drills, is a good one. I think it's overdone, and so we are we kind of I think we need to do something about it, or or make rocks larger in nullsec to make people go out and mine basic minerals again, which is an issue. Moon materials are overall much cheaper than they were a year ago. Metox moon mining has brought down the price for moon materials, so tier 2 production isn't as impacted by inflation because of this. But basic minerals out of control, and also not being mined a lot. So one of the two has to go. I think we need more miners in space. But yeah, yeah. So that's the summary up front. Let's look at some of the graphs to back that up. And again, this is the first stream from Australia. Obviously, as you can see, I'm not in my usual studio. I'm in a furnished apartment in Brisbane, Australia, and so bear with me as I am navigating through the charts here with about 3 monitors less than usual. Right. When we look at the overall graph here, let me just make sure you guys can see this. Go here. I think you can do that and you can see it well. Yeah. So production stabilized at quite a high level. So that's the red line up top. You can see that that is based on market value. All right. I also mentioned that last month. So this is not necessarily production just literally spiking. This is a mixture between, yes, people are producing a lot, but also market prices are rising at the same time. And so that inherently makes that graph go up. And it's the same with the mining graph. So as minerals get more expensive, if you look up at the top here, it says valued using a 30-day moving average of market price. Asteroid prices are based on refining value with 70% efficiency. And so, yeah, this is not only an increase in production and mining, but this is also an increase in price. Right. Now, moving along. Yeah, so this is the volume of asteroids mined. You can see that yes, we had an increase starting in November, but then it has stabilized since then. No real changes in gas mining since June, where we had a lot of the gas removed from faction blueprints, and so now there's a lot less gas being used in the EVE Online economy, and that's why there's less mined. But that's just all to be expected. So it's just less use in there, and I do think that there needs to be another use for gas, especially cytocerrosin and mycocerrosin, the nullsec gas. There just isn't a lot of use out there right now, and I think it could use some to create another mining opportunity for players, or an increased mining opportunity for players. Because clearly there are players out there that want to mine, right? They just aren't at the moment, because if these mineral price levels are not getting people out there to mine enough to make up for the supply shortage, then it's not about prices, it's not about profitability, it's about the actual mechanics of it. Ice mining spiked in December. That's because of the Winter Nexus event. There's a lot of ice mining and ice mining sites involved in Winter Nexus, and that's why we are seeing a spike in that. That is something normal that happens every year, right? And this is what I was talking about earlier. So this is what you're seeing here. The green section in each of these graphs is the portion of moon mining that comes from Metox moon drills. And as you can see here, R16, R8, basically full on Metoxed. Yeah. R4, about half of it. R32, about, I don't know, 2/3 of it. And R64s are the only ones that are mined by hand right now, pretty much at a larger scale, because the loss would be too high. So, whoops. You can see that. You can also see which region does it best. I can zoom in a little bit maybe here. See there. So you can see that overall, Veil of the Silent, that is Fraternity, Winterco, they are mining the most, but they are mining by hand. And you can see second is Fountain, that is the initiatives. The initiative, they are already very much on the Metanox train. And then Syndicate is about 2/3 Metanoxed. And then you have something like Scalding Pass, for example, that is basically 99% Metanoxed, and Outer Ring as well. Wicked Creek, essentially, look at this. Wicked Creek is 100% Metanoxed. Very, very, very interesting. Now, let's go and skip to this graph right here. As you guys know, my favorite graph. Let me see if you guys can. Let's start with this, right? So the overall money supply is what you see here on the top right. So we started the month with 2,429 trillion in ISK. We added 193 trillion in faucets. So literal ISK entering the game. The sinks amounted to 118 trillion, and the active ISK delta amounted to 64 trillion. Okay. The active ISK delta is when active players become inactive. Or CCP bans bots. Right? That's the other thing. They kind of mush it together so that it's not as easy to identify for us players, because honestly, people leaving the game and becoming inactive is not a great thing. And so understandably, they don't want to just report that number. And so they have it a little bit bundled up. Okay. You can be sure, though, that a lot of this is people actually leaving the game. And in a vacuum, this doesn't mean much. And that's why most of the time what I do is I go to Matthew's Power BI, and we look at what the what this is over time. All right, so let's have a look at that. Let's see how long that takes to load in Australia. In Europe, it's instant. All right. And we go here. Let me just make sure you guys can see December. No, you cannot. Okay, hold on. So there. Okay. This is the active ISK delta over time. And so you can see that certainly it's higher now than it was. And in one way, that is to be expected because there's just more money in the game. So if you have more ISK in game overall, then you also have a higher active ISK delta, because if the same proportion of players are leaving and they have more money, then it's just to be expected. On the other hand, this is, quite significant. So if you look at last year, for example, last year in November, we had the big positive spike of people returning for the expansion. This year we had that in October. That was mostly because there was the Goon move up in October. And so a lot of people had already come back before the expansion. And then we had actually a negative ISK delta in November when the expansion came out. And now we have in December again a fairly high ISK delta. Now let's look at faucets, okay? And this is what I mean. ISK faucets are just, they've been rising and rising and rising, and now they are at a level that is higher than at any point in time in the last 4 years. And I don't remember a time where it was higher, okay? So this is pretty massive. And so just just to be clear, this is not minerals entering the game, right? This is not mine. This is actually just faucets injecting straight up ISK into the game, so increasing the money supply in the game. The biggest of that is bounties. Okay, we can go back here, and the top, the blue bars on top here are the biggest the biggest ISK faucets, and the top one there with 62 trillion is oh, sorry about that. Still getting used to the new setup here. The big one on top is commodities, and the second one is bounty. So they're both about 60 trillion, and that is yeah, as somebody in chat just says, miners are ratting. That's right. That is people ratting and people running the event side. So commodities is people selling the overseer personal effects back to NPC buy orders, which generates just ISK from thin air. That's why that is questionable practice and needs to be checked in my point of view. And bounty prizes are what you get paid out straight up cash into your wallet when you rat. And so those two are making up the vast majority of faucets in the game. And in December, they were especially high because of the Winter Nexus event. Now, you have to keep in mind, as a player, there might not be a big difference on whether you're receiving loot that you then sell at moving market prices, or whether there is an overseer personal effect that you sell back to the to an NPC buy order and you get straight up ISK. Economically speaking, there's a huge difference, because as you sell loot, the price of the loot drops if a lot of the loot enters the system, and so that is self-regulating. Commodities like overseer personal effects are not self-regulating. If people are multi-boxing this, if people are running this incredibly efficient, right, and more efficient every year, and you don't change the events, then you're just injecting more and more ISK into the system, and that is in the end the cause for inflation that you see. And in the end, this tends to, like, inflation tends to benefit those that are able to run everything most efficiently, and mostly your new players, your average players, are suffering under this because they're running less. They're not causing the inflation, but they're suffering from the effects. And so overall, I'm not a huge fan. I've said this before. I'm not a huge fan of something like the Winter Nexus event, where we're just injecting 60 trillion ISK into the system, because in the end, the benefit of that is limited, because you're, instead of having the items regulate themselves, you're just causing inflation and having the market regulate itself through inflation. And that is why the ISK faucets are so incredibly high in December. The sinks, on the other hand, let's go back here. The sinks are also high, which is good, but they're not as high as they were because of the market tax. So the highest sink in the game is the transaction tax, the tax that we all pay when we make a a market transaction. When we sell something on the market, we all pay between 2 and 10%, depending on your skills and standings, or not standings, just skills, in market tax. And so that is that just means that everyone, the 50% tax cut right now just means that biggest thing is basically cut in half. And so the reason you would do that is to kind of stimulate the economy. Kind of in the real world, you cut taxes to stimulate the economy, to hope that you increase overall turnover and generate growth, and thereby generate the same sort of taxes. So what CCP is hoping to do is cut the market transaction, hopefully double the trade volume, and thereby have the same sink in place. And that just hasn't happened. So market transactions just haven't doubled. They've not significantly risen, and so this is certainly an issue. Yeah, Blue-Gray is ready. Blue-Gray says good for new players at a gloss, but better for experienced players, ergo bad for new players comparatively. That's people with English skills. That's how they say it. So overall, that is what we're seeing here. And by the way, what you're seeing down there, the highest things are transaction tax. The next one is LP store tax. So in the LP store, it's not really a tax. You actually pay ISK to buy something with LP, and that ISK leaves the system, which is also very good. And so that's down here. Let me see if I can show you guys. There, you can see it there. Transaction tax about 26 trillion. It should be a lot more. It should be about 40. And so yeah. And LP stores 17 trillion, and the broker's fee, which is the other component of a market transaction. So you pay a transaction tax when the transaction goes through, and you pay a broker's fee when you put up an order. And so both of those together are typically the biggest chunk of the sinks. And yeah, let me just read some chat because we have several CSM members in here. Drake Iden says there's also a smaller problem with massive faucets can make some players absurdly rich. Those players are a lot more keen to use contracts which are much lower tax rate, and public contracts have a capped tax, so large value items are lower tax percent in effect. That's absolutely right, Drake. I give you an example, right? Like let's say somebody like me is selling Plex. I'm very unlikely to sell or buy Plex or injectors or extractors anywhere on the market, right? Unless I have very cheap buy orders in place. But if I'm selling things, I'm much more likely to do this via contracts, and that skirts taxes all overall. So just in the real world, the rich people pay a lower tax rate typically because they're taking advantage of loopholes, and contracts being one of the big loopholes in EVE Online. So, and Crota, thanks for gifting a tier 1 sub to Derbyshire, UK. We all know why. Now, let's see what else is here in the graphs. Yeah, so here, this is your top 6 commodity faucets over time. So the NPC buy orders called commodities, right? They buy commodities back and therefore injecting ISK into the system. And you can see here the spike that we see in every December, and that's the overseer personal effects. This is what I was talking about, right here. If I do it like this, you can see it better. This right here is the overseer personal effect spike that we see in December every year from the Winter Nexus event. Sleeper components are essentially the blue loot from wormholes, yeah, and then Triglavian data down there is from Abyssal Space, and Rogue Drone analysis data is from Crab Beacons. And that's how ISK gets generated, and this is what I mean. Like, I'm not a huge fan of this Christmas ISK injection every year because it's it's really not. I don't know. It's not sustainable. Like, if you want to do that, then at least keep taxes in place. And this is the faucets over time, and so bounty prices very high, but that's because CCP increased the bounty percentage payout in nullsec. You can see what that does. Essentially the bounties that are paid out are much higher than they have been, and I think this also illustrates what somebody said in chat earlier. This is miners ratting. Right? This is people that might be mining otherwise are now ratting because it's paying better, it's less clicky, and EVE players are going to optimize. This is what happens. This right here is the money supply in EVE Online, and so This right here is what I'm talking about when I say the money supply, the amount of ISK available is increasing in Eve online. And so right now you can see that when we came from in 2017, we came from about 1,000 trillion, and we're now 2.5 times that. And that's a lot, right? A small increase is to be expected, right? That's typical for any normal economy, and it's definitely so for game economies. This is fantastic because most games don't get this right. If you play something like WoW, there's just rampant ISK inflation over time because they are not that economically focused in games like WoW. But EVE Online is an incredibly economic game, and you have a player-driven market, and so you have to be very, very focused on the economic section of the game. And this money supply increasing is just, for my taste, a little bit too high, and we can see that in rising prices. I say this all the time, but the saving grace for EVE, for CCP right here, is the velocity of ISK, because inflation is a product of the amount of available ISK by the velocity of ISK, and so the only reason that we don't have even more inflation going on is because the velocity of ISK isn't very, very high. So you have more ISK in the game, but it's not exchanging hands. And if you actually did have a lot of trade going on, we would see a lot more inflation happening because, you can imagine, and I say this almost every month, but I know that we also have some new viewers, so I have to explain this every once in a while. If you gave me 10 trillion ISK and I was just sitting on it, it would have absolutely no economic impact because I wouldn't be driving up any prices because I wouldn't be buying anything. If you gave me 10 trillion ISK and I started just investing it in the market, buying everything up, I would be driving up prices, and driving up prices is exactly what inflation is. And so you can imagine that if there is no velocity of ISK, right? If there's just slow, if there's just like people and veterans sitting on their ISK and not doing anything, then you're not really causing any inflation. That's what we're seeing here. So, what CCP was trying to do with the tax cut was increase the velocity of ISK, but I don't know if they really want to do that, because if you increase the money supply and increase the velocity of ISK through tax cuts, what you're going to have is even worse inflation. So, yeah. Crota is asking, is this players increasing ISK reserves for a purpose or having nothing to spend it on? I think it's what players have always done. I mean, the not having anything to spend it on is wars. So what people spend large amount of ISK in is wars. So if you don't fight any wars, then you won't have any then you won't have ISK leaving the game, or you won't have a high velocity of ISK. So I think a war now would absolutely cause inflation, because you would have all that ISK returning to the game and being used, and therefore driving up prices. Okay, now I think that's about it. This is the big one that everyone posted on Reddit last week, and that's the mineral price index. Yes, it's very, very high. It's incredibly high. It's out of control, but please keep in mind that this is only a small portion, right? The reason that you see the other indices not spiking because of the mineral price index is because basic minerals are especially relevant for tier 1 production, a little bit of tier 2 production, and then capital ships in terms of volume, but also not in terms of proportion. And so yes, this is driving up, for example, tier 1 prices. This is driving up tier 1 battleship prices, especially because they use a lot of basic minerals. But this is not wrecking the economy, as some people will have you believe on Reddit. All right, so keep calm. It will be fine. It's on CCP's radar. We're trying to, give them ideas on how to bring this down, and I think they will do something about it eventually. And I think what you have to do, honestly, is not mess with minerals directly. What you have to do is you have to make mining more interesting to players, and that is just by increasing rock size. Keep calm and mine more coxid and parchment is what Drake Eden wants you to do. Active mining when? Yeah, I don't think people are interested in active mining, unfortunately. I'd love them to be, but they seem to not want to do that. And we finish the day with nope, that's it. That's it. Everything else is not really anything to write home about. So that sums up the MER for December. We're gonna run a quick Oz report on the live stream now. Quick break, and then we'll do the Oz report, and then we'll wrap up stream 1 in Australia. If you are watching this on VOD, I'll see you next month for the next monthly economic report.